In this clip, I'm going to show you how to add the Google sign-in button to a Hello World React app. Alright, so let's jump right into it. So this is going to be a Hello World React app, so I'm just going to do npx create react app, and I'm going to call this Google Auth Demo. So let's wait for the React app to be created, and then we'll start setting it up. Alright, so I'm going to cd into Google Auth Demo 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one shell session for npm run start that'll start serving the project. Oh, I've already got something running. Whoops. Let's do that again. npm run start. Alright, so what this does is this brings the Hello World React app up to the screen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to gut most of this and then change it to be this. Alright, so what that means is let's open this up in VS Code. I'm going to open up another shell session here, open up VS Code, and bam. Whoops, that font is too small. There we go. That's what we wanted. So let's take a look at app.js. A little too big. We'll take a look at app.js, and let's get rid of everything we don't need, which is most of this. So let's get rid of everything up to including the header, and then I'm going to have one h1 element that says Google Login Demo, and then I'm going to throw the button after that. So that'll be button sign in with Google. Let's take a look at what we have. Boom. The other thing I'm going to do just real quick, because I tend to prefer it this way, let's just implement dark mode for this real quick. So for the body, we're going to do background color black. You know, I'll just use black. And the font color will be white. Boom. All right, cool. I got dark mode on. I tend to record these things at night, so it kind of helps to have the background be dark. So first part to this is we are going to add in the Google API library. So if you go to Google sign in for websites, they have their documentation, which walks you through this process. So the first thing they suggest here is to load the Google Platform library. So we'll use that because it's what they have on their docs. But a note that I'm going to dive into a little bit later is that there are sometimes multiple, or rather, I've seen two different JS files from the Google Developer Console script used. So I'm going to drop this here. So that's going to bring in platform.js. So that's the script tag, and then what that means is in my application, I should be able to initialize Google. So let's do that. I'm going to convert this to be a React class component just because it makes it a little bit easier to understand what's going on. The first time this runs, which we can override a componented mount. So let's do that. Extends react dot component, and then this should be a function called render. I'm going to take that, plop it in there, and I'm going to override component did mount and loading, just to know that it's actually working. Window.gappy.load auth2 is the first thing that has to be loaded. What this effectively does is it gives us access to window.gappy.auth2.init, where we can actually initialize the authentication piece. So that's going to accept a parameter called client underscore ID, and this is going to be the value of the Google API client. So we made this as part of the first video, so you can check out the link in one of these things here. Check out the link there, and that'll walk you through getting a client ID from the Google Developer Console. So I'm going to drop mine in here. And just a reminder that the Google Docs for sign-in for websites is Google sign-in for websites API docs. It's this one, Google sign-in JavaScript client reference. I'll include this link in the description so you'll be able to check it out. And all the methods that we're going to be using, so for example, auth2 init, it's going to have where you actually need to pass in, which is saying you know, pass in an object that's got a property called client ID. So that's what I just dropped in there. And once this is loaded, let's see what this says. API initted. That's English, right? All right, jump over here. Let's take a look at the console. Make that a little bit bigger. Maybe a little bit too big, but fuck it. Here we go. So loading and API initted. So those two things ran. If I refresh the page, what? All right, so when I refresh the page, I see that the API got initted. So we have run through everything up to here. So we saw this message. So we seem to have everything configured correctly so far. The next step is once we have that initialized, we actually have to show the button. So this is going to be a different library. So for that, we have to do the same song and dance. Gappy.signin2, gappy.load signin2, and then when this is loaded, run this callback function, which will then let me do window.gappy.signin2.render. I have to pass it the CSS ID of the element that I want to render as the button. So this is going to be login button, and I have to pass in some parameters to it. Let's do params, and let's define params. So what does params need? We're going to jump over to the JavaScript client docs, and we're going to find the signin signin2.render. So we have to pass in an object containing these settings. So on the bright side, you can configure most of these. You don't have to configure most of these. You can just leave them. Blank. The important one here is on success. Right, width and height have default values. Scope has profile by default. The important one here is on success. So let's take a look at implementing on success. So what do we want to happen on success? That's a really good question. So since this is a React app, actually, I was going to say we can save it to state, but I don't think that's really necessary for the purpose of this demo. We could, however, just do user has finished signing in. That console log message should be good enough. All right, let's see what happens now in the app. Bump. Cannot read property style of null. I don't quite know what this is complaining about, but this looks like it's coming from the Google API library. So not something I directly have, but cannot read property style of null. So sign into is supposed to render the login button. Oh, I never defined this over here. Button ID login button. Let's see if that fixes it. Oh, sweet. So we have the Google sign-in button, but you'll notice that this, if we zoom in, does this work? Can I come? If we zoom in, what is this? we have the actual sign in button, which is in here, and then there is this outer button, which is probably just the default style of the button. The Google Docs actually suggest you to use a div, and it'll make it look correct, right? Oh, one of my styles must have gone haywire. Let's do this in an incognito window because I had previously signed in. Problem number one. Cannot read properly load of undefined, which means that window.gappy doesn't exist. If window.gappy does not exist, that means this script tag has not finished loading. So one thing to note is that the default, the script tag that Google has in their API documentation includes these two keywords here, async, defer. Now, those are there for good reason because you should be able to load these scripts asynchronously. The problem is that there is no guarantee that when your React component loads, all the other scripts have already loaded. You kind of have to code around that or just be aware of it. So you can either implement like a retry mechanism to check if window.gappy exists yet, and if not, just keep on waiting. The other thing you can do is remove async defer. The downside there is that by removing those keywords, if you are pulling in this library, especially as part of the head tag, and there's anything going wrong with that domain. So for example, if apis.google.com is returning 500s or something like that, your page will fail to load because this script can't be pulled in. Whereas with async defer, you can allow the rest of your page to load and your JavaScript will just be loaded later on, but you do have to code around it. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to remove async defer just because it's a little bit easier to troubleshoot these issues. So now if we jump back in here, oh, this isn't centered. Fuck it. All right, I'm going to sign in as danny.intricatecloud.io. Drop in my password. I'm going to log in, and I'm signed in. See? And we didn't really have to do much. Now, check out what happens when I refresh the page. Boom. Did you see that? I'll do it one more time. Maybe in slow motion. Boom. So what you see is that when you first load the page, the button will show that you're not signed in, but it will check if you have a cookie from the Google domain. And if that cookie exists and you have a valid token, you will be signed in. This has a few consequences to the way that you implement the page in your React component, because your default state will always be that you're not signed in, and through a series of events, you will then be able to see that the user has signed in, but you first have to assume that no matter what, when the page loads, your user is not signed in and does not have a valid session. Jumping back to the application, this is going to be a source of nuisance. So the documentation suggests putting in a callback here for something called onload. So what it's meant to be is to provide the name of a function that's going to exist on inside of your HTML, and that'll be called once the library is actually loaded. So I can say on gappy loaded will be the function to call. So what that means is that I'll have to create a new script here, and I will have to define a function on gappy loaded, and then I can do something here, right? But you'll notice this script tag doesn't know anything about the React component I have here in application.js. So it's kind of not helpful for me to define a function here. Additionally, if I was to define a function on a window here, I have no guarantee that the component has run before the script has actually loaded. Since there's no guarantee of it, you kind of have to code for the worst case scenario, which is that you just need to know when the library has loaded. So there's a slightly easier way of doing this. We'll just get rid of those script tags entirely, and we will programmatically create that script tag. So on component.mount, I'm going to create a function called insert gappy script. And what insert gappy script will do is create a script element using document.createElement of type script. Script.source is going to be equal to, script.source is going to be equal to what I had in index.html, which is this guy. Just up to platform.js. Back over here. So load that script, and then on load, which is a callback that a script element allows. Script.onload, I'm going to call a function called initialize Google sign in, this dot. And I'm going to move all of this code, which I need to run after the gappy script is loaded. I'm going to put that in initialize Google sign in. So that's going to load the auth2 library, do auth2.init, and then render the sign in button using this call. So now if I refresh the page and I'm over here, insert gappy script is not defined. Insert gappy, oh, I forgot to do this dot. Cool, let's jump over. Boom. Okay. Something is happening. I got loading, but I did not see, I got loading, insert gappy script does document.createElement, sets the source, sets on load. But I never added this to the document. So I'm going to do document.appendChild script. That should kick everything on. Only one element on document allowed. Oh, did I use the wrong method? I may have used the wrong method. Document append script tag. One of these is supposed to show me head or document.body. This is the one I was looking for. Document.body.appendChild. And back over here. Boom. I got my Google login demo with the sign in button, everything initialized correctly, and I didn't have to, oh, this is still here. Let me remove this because that's what we wanted to show. Boom. Everything still works by removing the script tag. So one of the benefits of doing this is that all the logic for the callback exists here within your component, so you don't have to do a weird bridge between things that need to be inside of index.html and things that can be inside of your app component. So this is a pretty easy way of including it. You just have to know to dynamically add in the script element. Or if you don't care, just put it in index.html. It really depends on how you're trying to use it. All right, so a note about this library. So you might be tempted to actually download this library, right? So if you take this link, drop it into here, you'll see that here is where this defines, this is going to be hard to read, but this defines window.gappy. You might be tempted to just save this file and just include it in your application so you don't have to pull in the script using a script tag. Like you can maybe just import it. So there's, I'm going to call out these two lines, gappy.load auth2 and gappy load sign in2. The reason why these load functions exist is that the platform.js library will actually download other JavaScript files from Google servers that actually contain these libraries. So if you were to try to use gappy.auth2 without doing gappy.load, you'd find that auth2 either doesn't have any methods or doesn't exist yet. Behind the scenes, they point you to different versions of their different libraries. So gappy.auth2 will be at one particular version, gappy.signin2 will be at another particular version. And if you wind up saving the file, you might wind up fetching old versions of the library, like for auth2 or signin2, because they constantly push out new bug fixes or rather updates to that script. So they will point you at all the new versions of their different libraries behind the scenes. So it really doesn't work for you to save the file and just use it inside of your React app. It might work today, but it will be highly likely that it won't work at like next week. All right, so this about wraps up this Hello World example. Really, everything is, all the code that you need to initialize the Google Sign-In button is inside of this method, initialize Google Sign-In. And this is really all you need to get the button. But I think you'll know that this is kind of a silly example because nobody just has one page with a sign-in button that just changes state. Usually, you know, you want to be able to show the user's profile or something like that. So that's what we're going to be getting into the next part. Thanks for checking out the video. If you found it helpful, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see my upcoming video, which will be part 3 in the Adding Google Sign-In to Your Web App series, where I'm going to show you how to use the Google API library to do more things like showing the user's profile picture or getting their email address. Stay tuned.